Hello everyone, welcome back to JP's Budget Collecting and our weekly look back at the CBSI Hot Top 10 list from 6 months ago. This week we're looking back at the Hot Top 10 list from December 7th, 2018, and I'm recording this a little earlier than normal. I'm recording this on Tuesday, June 4th, 2019. So just in case some news breaks or something that affects one of these books late in the week, you'll know when I recorded this. My guess is these books will probably be pretty solid with what I'm giving you today. This list is kind of refreshing in the fact that I think there's actual value in the books, most of the books that are on this list. It's dominated by first appearances. There's 8 first appearances on this list. There are 2 hot covers, but even they have a little more value, I think, than is maybe typically the case. But overall, this is a list that actually, I think, some of these books are a little better bet than is, like I said, typically the case with this list. There are 2 repeat offenders from last week, and there are 2 other books that are directly associated with books that were on the list last week. So there's a lot of carryover this week from last week's video. But with that, let's get into the list, and we will start at number 10, and that was Black Hammer number 8. If you remember, Black Hammer number 1 made the list last week, and that was all related to option news. Black Hammer number 8 is making the list because of that same option news. This is the first appearance of Sherlock Frankenstein, who I guess is a character. I've never read Black Hammer, so I don't know a lot about it, but I believe is a character that most people thought would be in the movie or in the TV show if they actually made something from the option. Back then, number 8 was going for $15 to $20 when it had previously been in dollar bins. Now it is back to being just a $5 to $15 book. It's pretty easily had for under $10. So given that there's been no follow-up to the option news, that's not really a whole lot of surprise. So it's the first appearance of a character, but it was really being driven by the fact that people thought they're going to make something of it. They may still make something of it, but right now the book can be had pretty easily if you're a big Black Hammer fan, or heard good things about the story, just never read it myself. So now would be the time maybe to look into that book if you had any interest. And number 9 on the list is HAWKMAN number 4. And this is the first appearance of Zatanna. Man, it'd be nice if Zatanna was actually on this cover. But she's not. And but this is a book that obviously has some value. The reason this book was kind of spiking a little bit back in December was there were a few rumors that maybe she would be showing up in the DC movies sooner rather than later. There's really been no follow-up to that in terms of actual confirmation that Zatanna is going to appear in one of these movies, or that there would be a Zatanna movie. I think it's a safe bet that at some point Zatanna is going to be in or get her own movie. I think it's a matter of time personally, but right now there's nothing official or sure about that. Back then, CGC 4.5 set a new record at $380. And then immediately broke it and sold for $412. So that was kind of what was making it hit the list. There was a couple other grades, I think, that also broke records. Right now, when I looked, all the recent sales of raw copies of this book were all 150 plus, depending on grade, and it could go a lot plus, depending on the grade. 4.5s, there's been a couple of sales since then. They've been more in the 275 to 325 range. So it's kind of come back down toward where, not all the way back to where it was before this spike, but it's back down in that $300 range for a 4.5, which I think it's basically was kind of the top end before this. Recently, a 6.0 went for $475, and the most recent 8.5 went for $1,300. So really, in looking at this, I use Go Collect to look at a lot of this, and looking at the 25 most recent sales at all the different grades, really just seems to be kind of a slow climber. It continues to climb, but fairly slowly. I think this is a book that does have value, does have some investment capabilities, and it's still fairly reasonable at most grades. So I think that might be, if you're a big Zatanna fan, probably want to try to get on that book before there is actual movie news as opposed to after. Number 8 on the list is Infinite Crisis number 5. This is the first appearance of Jaime Reyes, the new Blue Beetle. This is a book that spiked because there was news they were going to make a Blue Beetle movie and they were going to use Jaime Reyes back in December. I don't know that this was ever confirmed. I've not heard anything about it since. The book spiked. There's actually 2 covers to this book. This cover went quite a bit, was going for more than the other cover. Not a lot, but a little bit more. And that was because he's actually on the cover as opposed to the other one that he is not on the cover of, which is a George Perez cover. Back then, this book jumped basically from a $1 bin book to a $15 to $25 book. Now, it is more of a $5 to $15 book, so it's basically come back considerably. I mean, there's still, it's kind of a small first appearances basically, but with no follow-up movie news, it hasn't been able to sustain any of the momentum. Interestingly, like the most recent 9.8, which was was actually back toward the end of February, went for $250, but the most recent 9.6, which went last Thursday, sold for, went today. I was looking at the wrong thing. Sold for $36. So, not a lot of value has sustained after that movie news. This book has basically come back. If the door moved in the video, that's because the cat came into the room. So, no ghost. So, she's probably going to make an appearance here in just a second. So, that was Infinite Crisis, number 5, the first appearance of Jaime Reyes. I think that's a book that probably, if they go on and use him in movies, will have some value. So, right now might not be a bad time to get it because it's not spiking at the moment. It's back down to easily attainable for under $10. Number 7 on the list is Amazing Fantasy number 1, and this is the first Ariana, who becomes Anya Corazon, Spider-Girl. This is another spider character. As you know from last week's list, this is right around the time that Spider-Verse comes out. This came out December 14th, so a week from when this list came out. I don't know that there was rumors that she was in the movie, but I think there was just there was a little buzz around all these kind of spider-related characters at that time. It basically jumped up to a $20 book. It was going 9.8s were going for $200. Now this is back down to a $5 to $10 book, kind of like Infinite Crisis number 5. Easily found for under 10. Or 410 or under, I should say. 9.8, most recent 9.8 went for $115. This is another one I think might be a good time to get on if you have interest in these spider characters. I think there's a fair chance that she would show up in one of these Spider-Verse movies eventually. Particularly if they do kind of the female one. But I honestly think if they do the female one, they're going to focus on Silk, Spider-Gwen, and Jessica Drew. I think are much more likely to show up than Anya is, but you never know, and it's a $5 book, so if you want to do a little spec on her at $5, I don't think you're going to be losing a whole lot. At number 6 on the list is a Spider-Verse character that is got some value and continues to have some value. And that is Edge of Spider-Verse number 2 shows up on the list again. This is the first Spider-Gwen. And basically the second week in a row this hit, and still 1 week out from the movie that everyone knew she was going to be in. Back then, 9.8 had went past $500. So that's what caused it to hit the list for a second week in a row, is that for the first time, 9.8s were going for more than 500. Since then, as we talked about last week, this book has basically stayed in that same range since the movie came out. 9.8s have come back a slight bit. Now they go for basically anywhere between $400 and $500 consistently is where 9.8 goes of this book. Raw copies are consistently going for $150 to $200 plus, depending on condition and that kind of thing. It's hard to find a raw copy of the first print for less than $150. It's just unless it's just beat up. So this is a book I think that has some room still to grow, but is definitely already got some heat on it. So if you have it, great. If you haven't gotten it yet, you're going to be paying a little more of a premium, and I don't see that changing anytime soon. With that, we're moving into the top 5 on the list, and it is another book from last week, and it is Ultimate Fallout number 4, which was the star of Spider-Verse movie, the first appearance of Miles Morales. As we talked about last week, raw copies had jumped basically from $50 to 60 to 70 to 70 to 80 basically. And with this time on the list, 9.8, it actually went over $400 for the first time. Now 9.8 on this has come back a little more than they have on the Spider-Verse number 2. They're going for $250 to $350. But the raw copies have actually continued to gain momentum. They're up to $80 to $100 and going for that consistently. There are a ton of these out there, but you're going to have to pay a little more than you would have, and I don't ever see that really changing. I'd be very surprised. I think you might find a bargain now and then, get one for a raw copy for $60 to $70, but I don't think it's really coming back. I think this book is going to stay pretty much where it's at, if not grow with a sequel or additional movies, or if Miles were to show up at the end of Spider-Man Homecoming in some way or something like that. I think this book would just take off even more. The only thing I think that's really held this book back from being, more in the New Mutants 98 range, NYX range in terms of value, I think is the fact that there's just so many of them. There's so many Ultimate Fallout 4s out there. It's really easy to find a copy. I think that has suppressed the value. Otherwise, I think Miles would be worth considerably more. With that, we're going to move on to number 4 on the list. And for the first time, we have a book that's on the list because of a cover and not because of a first appearance. And this is Lady Death, Nightmare Symphony. Nightmare Symphony. Sorry. Lady Death, Nightmare Symphony. The Art Germ variant, and this was a Kickstarter, and Lady Death knows how to do Kickstarters because they had like a $1,500 goal or something, or no, $15,000 goal or something, and it hit the goal in like 30 minutes, and it ended up making like $30,000 on the Kickstarter for this. And this was basically one of the variants you got if you made a huge donation. And it was actually, you got 3 of them. There was 3 versions of this. There was the version I'm showing you. There was a black and white version. And then there was what they called a hollow foil version. And you got all 3 if you made an $800 donation or more. I'm not sure. I couldn't find exactly how many of these exist. But I believe there's actually less than 100 sets of these 3 out there. It is a gorgeous Lady Death cover. And basically, then right after it came out, people were selling singles for $350. They were selling sets of 3 for $1,200. Since then, basically, those were raw books, obviously, when they first came out. When I looked on eBay, I could not find a listing or a sale of a raw book. People took these, they sent them to CGC, they got them slabbed, they got them back. Or they got them signed by Art Germ, then they sent them to CGC and got them slabbed and got them back. All the recent sales were not just slab books, but were signed slab books. There are some just regular slab books listed currently, but all the recent sales were 9.8 slab books, and they were basically going, depending on which version, the version you see here was the most easily available, was going for around $400. The black and white goes for somewhere in between $400 and $700, and the hollow foil is going for around $700. There are no listings for less than $650, and that includes like non-signed versions right now. Everything listed is $650 or above for any of the 3 covers. and the a set of the 3 slabbed, they're asking $2,000 for right now. The one entire set you can get of 9.8 slabbed, they're asking $2,000 for. So this is just a super rare cover. I know there are people that don't like Art Germ particularly. I am not one of those. I love Art Germ. This will be an Art Germ I will never own, but it's a gorgeous cover, and there's not many of them. It was hard to get, and the people that have them aren't giving them up unless you give them a pretty penny for it. With that, let's move on to number 3 on the list, and that is Uncanny X-Men, Volume 5, number 4, the Mark Brooks 1 in 100 variant, and this was just a Psylocke cover that people loved. Right out of the gate, this 1 in 100 was going for $200, which for a high incentive variant, going for double is relatively rare. It's not unheard of, but it's pretty rare, and it has continued to sell for that. Right now, basically, sales are 150 plus to over 200 for raw copies. I did find it interesting. The only 9.8 sale I found was someone managed to snag a 9.8 for 220. But if you look at listings, it's listed raw from anywhere from 175 to 300, and 9.8 start at basically 425 and up. So that's where the listings are at. There's not a lot of sales of the slab copies for that $420 plus because there was only one, I think, that was down there. Everything else was like $450 or $490. But people are still buying the raw copies on a fairly consistent basis for around $200, which is pretty rare for a high incentive like this to continue for this long. So people just love this cover. Next up is number 2 on the list, and this is another book that relates directly back to last week's list. This is Batman Arkham Knight, number 1, the GameStop Gold variant. And I think this was something that only Power Rewards customers could get. So last week we talked about just the regular GameStop variant of Arkham Knight number 1. This was the first appearance of Arkham Knight. And people were specking on this because Arkham Knight was supposed to show up in Detective Comics 1000. Arkham Knight did show up in Detective Comics 1000, but it was a completely different character other than the look and the name to the one in the video game. So in some ways, yes, they use the name in this book, but it's not that character. So back then, this gold version raw was going for $250. Now, well, in March, it was going for, there were a couple of sales, it went for $60 and $70. And by April, it was down to $20 or $30 for the 2 sales of this gold version. There have been no sales since April because people are still asking $75 plus for this book, and people aren't willing to pay it anymore because it's not the character that ended up showing up in Detective Comics 1000. So this is a book that, yeah, if you chase this one, this is going to be kind of painful because I don't think you're ever going to get your value back out of it because, yeah, they use the name, but it's not the same character. And last on the list, number 1 is Special Marvel Edition number 15, and this is the first appearance of Shang-Chi. And if you know anything, this hit the list because news was announced that Marvel is making a Shang-Chi movie. This book was hitting all-time records in multiple grades. A 9.8 went for $3,300, a 9.4 went for $600, a 9.2 went for $325. These were all records at the time. Marvel appears to be committed to this movie. We've heard more news. There's rumors now that the Mandarin may be the villain instead of Fu Manchu because of the difficulties that surround Fu Manchu, which I won't get to. But so the Mandarin may make an actual appearance in the MCU. The result of that is this book has continued to go up, up, up. Raw copies now can't really be had for less than $150, and and up from there depending on the grade of that raw copy. A 9.2 recently is the most recent 9.2 went for $800, and it's consistently going for $750 to $850 kind of range for a 9.2. 9.4 went for the most recent one went from $995. 4 of the last 5 have went for right at $1,000 of a 9.4. The other one went for $850, but the sixth book back went for $1,200. So 9.4, and you remember it hit an all-time high at $600 just 6 months ago. So that book has all but doubled in 6 months. 9.8, which hit an all-time high back in December, $3,300. I said it is now going for $4,000. This is a book that was probably a little underrated, but Marvel really hadn't used Shang-Chi very much. I knew he existed, but I didn't know anything about him. I know they used him in a recent Domino run. He appeared in that for a few chapters, but he really hasn't been a character that's been used much. I think what happens with this book will depend a lot on how good this movie is. If you think about a lot of these Marvel characters that have gotten movies, the success of Iron Man, like Iron Man was probably an underrated book before the movies came out. The sustained success of that movie and that character and Robert Downey Jr. means Iron Man's never going to be an undervalued book again. Will Shang-Chi come back from where it's at right now? I kind of doubt it. I think it's just now getting to probably where it belongs as a book. I think if the movie is successful, it will continue to grow. I don't know that it'll grow a ton because it has grown so much already. But I think this is definitely a book that was probably pretty undervalued. And the fact that Marvel's going to turn it into something and the MCU's history means that this book is probably just going to continue to grow. So that is the list for this week. As I said, there's a lot more value here. You got the first appearance of Shang-Chi. You got the first appearance of Miles Morales. You got the first Zatanna. You got the first Spider-Gwen. You have a couple other smaller characters like Jaime Reyes and Spider-Girl that potentially have some long-term value. You have a couple of first appearances that, and maybe even Sherlock Frankenstein has some value. I don't know. It depends on what they do with the Black Hammer in terms of a series and that kind of stuff. Arkham Knight probably doesn't. And then you have 2 hot covers that I don't think are really going to be... I think these are 2 hot covers that are probably going to sustain. There's not a ton of, those Lady Deaths out there, are George Popular or Lady Deaths Popular. I think those are going to continue to be high-valued books. And so far, that Mark Brooks Psylocke cover shows zero sign of slowing down. So that's this week's list. I want to thank you guys for joining me, and we will catch you next time.